What's up? Coming to you live from NYC. Um, lest any of you or anyone question my dedication to not only the students but the course and the material, let it be known that I am recording this from my buddies. I'm on vacation, quote unquote, technically, but I'm shooting this, taking time out for you guys to talk about Chris Rock from on location in the city. So, um, just I want you guys to know that I know it's a summer course, but I still give a shit about it and about you guys and about the whole thing. So, Chris Rock. Let's talk about Chris Rock. It's hard to talk about Chris Rock um, without talking about the slap heard around the world. I remember when it happened. If you don't know, somehow, God bless you. But Will Smith, infamously slapping Chris Rock on stage at the Oscars. So it was kind of this moment for comedy where it was like a lot of people were like, now it's going to be torture in clubs and stuff because people are going to be inspired by Will Smith to just go up and punch comics if they don't like what they're saying or whatever. I don't know that happened, but it still was. It was an unfortunate event that kind of has now. It's somehow now a mark on Chris Rock's career, right? But he came back and he did sort of a response special, um, where he basically said what he wanted to say. Um, but before that, it would suck if that becomes his claim to fame, or what people know him for. But what happened? What happened before that was Chris Rock was an up and coming stand up, and he came out of the 80s, right? 80s and 90s, where he was still, and some of you mentioned in your comments, like you can hear Pryor in there, you can hear Eddie Murphy in there, right? So he came from this lineage or this comedy tree, and he made his name doing a lot of like stereotypical 80s stuff. So a lot of his act before he got really good at the craft was, black people are like this, white people are like this. Like that kind of, it's pretty easy. Um, and if you do it well, it's pretty easy. And again, like that's like jester phase stuff. So the stuff that you watched, hopefully, was the the link to the Netflix thing. They've been shitty for some reason, but I hope most, if not all of you guys, found your way over to Netflix to watch the first half of Tambourine. Um, but this Never Scared's from 2004, so it's kind of an interesting little time capsule, right? It's Bush, it's Bush era politics, it's Bush era um, problems, I guess. Um, and the Bush era kind of was this sort of canary in the coal mine for the Trump era, if you really think about it. And here's Chris Rock just kind of really laying it out there, and getting into, a lot of the truth that had been sort of obfuscated um, by that administration, and the attempts to, right, distract us, right, because that's, really, if you go back, like this, the whole media distraction thing, which now is just like commonplace, right? Now, if you're in politics or Hollywood or whatever it is, so you do something shitty. It's like, okay, how do we change the news cycle, right? Get it off, get the spotlight off of our shittiness and onto something else that's probably less meaningful, probably less important to the grand scheme of things, but is hyper sensationalized and all those kinds of things. So it really started with Clinton and the Clinton Lewinsky scandal and the emergence of 24-hour news. Like those two things sort of conflated at the same time to create this atmosphere of like conjuring up news stories. Not that the Lewinsky thing wasn't news, but you know what I'm saying. Like focusing on the either sexualized or um, hyper violent or uh, the old adage, if it bleeds, it leads. Like the opening story has to be somehow, you know, crazy or to grab the attention of the viewer. And this is when news started to slowly become entertainment, not news. Started to become everything was opinion, mostly because of Clinton Lewinsky. Right now, there was this thing that the left had a mark against them. So here comes Fox News and the right to be like, oh, you know, impeach him, he's terrible, family value, whatever. So now the left needs something to sort of, and that's really where this hyper sort of mudslinging thing started. So it's like this convergence of like I said, like politics and media and 24-hour news, where it's like there isn't 24 hours of news. I'm just sorry, there's just not. Um, but 24-hour news is driven by ads. It's driven by revenue. How do you get revenue? You get stories. How do you get stories that aren't there? You fucking make them up, or you make non-stories into stories. Anyway, Chris Rock sort of was tapping into that, right? And in Never Scared, and then in Tambourine, Tambourine is, what year was it? It was like 2018. So there's 14 years in between. And he had done specials in between, but it's an older, more mature, just sort of, I think, more seasoned Chris Rock. I think Never Scared was like his peak, but Tambourine has some really interesting takes. And just perspective, like I said, we've talked about the wholesome session so far, is like you want to see artists evolve. You want to see them go from making silly jokes to making you think a little bit about what they're saying to, maybe changing the way we look at certain issues or think about certain things. And I think Chris Rock does that. I mean, he went from one of the worst Saturday Night Live cast members to one of the greatest stand-up comedians, like, ever. He's up there. So that's always interesting to me, right? So some of you mentioned like his on-stage performance. He moves, he paces a lot, right? He covers a lot of the stage. This is actually filmed in the same building, same stage as Eddie Murphy's Delirious. Which I don't know, that's a fun fact, as they say. But his cadence is imperative to his act. if you noticed, he repeats things a lot, right? Um, and I don't think he's maybe he is at the beginning or at certain jokes. He's not repeating those things to be funny. It's not like he gets a laugh and then he's like repeats it because he wants more of a laugh. I don't think it's that. He's repeating a lot of those things because we're not listening, right? That's him like being like, no, seriously. Like there were a lot of Bill Hicks moments, right, where he'll say a joke and everyone will laugh and it'll be like, no, I don't think you understand what's at stake here, right? And he sort of reiterates it and he kind of gets almost agitated. I think there's a lot of that in Chris Rock in Never Scared, where he's like he keeps repeating things, and yes, to a fact, like it can be funny, but I think the purpose for that for him, and it's a big part of um, his whole his whole persona on stage. I think it's for emphasis. It's for there's a little bit of hey, this isn't just jokes up here. This isn't just comedy. There's way more to this than meets the eye, like the Transformers. There's more than meets the eye here. But it's useless if we, the audience, aren't either acknowledging it or attuned to it or um, at least engaging it in constructive um, a constructive way. I mentioned before, like he talks a lot about the distractions to keep our minds off of anything consequential. Like again, this ties into a bunch of you connected. You can hear some Carlin in him, right? Um, but that connection to Carlin comes through when he's talking about, Carlin did the whole thing about the illusion of choice, right? Um, Even Hicks did the whole thing about American Gladiators. Like, here, you idiots, watch this. Here's hours and hours of American Gladiators and the NFL, whatever. Pituitary cases is beating the shit out of each other. You're free to do as we tell you. Like that whole thing. A lot of Chris Rock sort of brought that to this new millennium in 2004, talking about how generally the powers that be are creating those. Like they make us think this stuff is important and it's not, right? Because it's on the news. Well, yeah, the news was the news was bought and paid for way before you and I started paying attention to it. Um, and the whole bit he does about you know Bush made the sex tape with Paris Hilton. Bush sent the girl to Kobe's room. Bush did all these kinds of things, all these things to sort of again distract the general public from paying attention to what Bush was doing and Cheney and the Iraq War. I mean the whole shit show that ended up being. But that's a seed of something that has only grown, since 2004. I mean, think about now, like I said before, like it's you know it's common practice to people talk about, oh, you just got to change the news cycle, talk about something else that's either made up or irrelevant, and people will forget, and people will just move on to the next thing. Um, that's basically what he's talking about there. I like when he talks about, he because he connects us all to the Bush administration, right? The whole patriotism, racism, right? When he's like, it's weird to be that patriotic. There's something, and again, this is another thing that's been exacerbated since 2004. It's weird to be that patriotic. There's something at the root of that goes beyond. It usually comes from a place of hate, um, or evil, or corruption, or whatever it is. But the patriotism is like, yeah, America, you know, um, you know, fuck, fuck the foreigners or whatever, and then it was fuck France, and then it was um, fuck terrorists, whatever it was. And he's like, just listen to yourselves because I know Jews and blacks are next, right? That train's never late. That's that little tag he puts on there. But just how that quickly, how that happens, and under the guise of patriotism, you start to get a lot of hate crimes and things like that. And that, that ended up being, when Trump was elected, right? All these spikes in anti-Semitism, anti-Asian, um, anti-LGBTQ, like all those spikes, and everybody, oh, well, we just love our country. Like, it's easy. It's not easy, but it's become easy to just couch that as patriotism or love of country, love it or leave it, and here's, Chris Rock talking about it way before this, which is like, it's a little prophetic, but it's sad too, because like, we did nothing to stop it. We did nothing to sort of figure that out, I guess. Yeah, the Patriot Act, again, in that whole soup. This goes back to the Carlin thing. Anytime there's this sort of outrage, like the government will swoop in and take away some of your freedoms right under your nose without you knowing it, right? It's like the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on terror. Like, those are the three things. Well, each of those things, the media conspires with the whatever administration, in most cases, and like, oh, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. We got to do this to stop it. Okay, and everyone's like, yeah, let's do that. And generally, that results in you losing freedoms and things like that. So that's, again, here's Chris Rock talking about this stuff pretty frankly, right? He has a line in Never Scared that I quote way too oddly frequently. Anyone who makes up their mind before they hear the issue is a fool. And, like, could that not be more applicable to now, to today, where it's like you don't even know what anyone's talking about, but you know your side's stance. Like, he talks about the gang mentality. Everyone wants to be a part of a gang, wants to be a part of a team, and it's less about we're not all on the same team, basically. But that idea that because I'm, let's say, conservative, these are the things I believe unwaveringly. And you have to, and if you don't, you're cast out. You're a piece of shit. And same for the left, right? And then he goes, he makes obviously a joke and explains, like, he's like, I'm, on crime, I'm conservative, and prostitution, I'm liberal, like that. And obviously, that's a silly joke to make the point, but yeah, nobody is one thing. I mean, there's obviously exist people who believe all the stuff on the right or believe all the stuff on the left, but the best version of this, whatever this is, world, life, country, culture, is going to emerge when we take the best ideas from both sides. To say that neither side has a good idea is just tribalism. It's just stupid. So power should work toward the middle. In other words, if you have this spectrum, any binary spectrum, right? In this case, we'll use right versus left politically. You never want to be too right. You never want to be too left, because look what happens. Right now, the 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 end of the spectrum on the right is lunatics. The end of the spectrum on the left is lunatics. So somewhere in the middle is where power is going to coalesce and be effective, right? If we can acknowledge that each side has some good things to offer, like let's take those and let's take those and let's move forward, right? Like that's another example is I'll use like masculinity and femininity, right? Um, Men, we'd be better off if men were more comfortable tapping into their or expressing their feminine sides, and we'd be better off if women weren't, uh, you know, completely embarrassed by showing their masculine side, because we all have all of it in there. It's just how much of it do we tap into? Um, and you know, it, it applies to most binary systems. You really don't want to be at either end, which is kind of a problem with binary systems in and of itself. It's like that's generally how we gravitate toward. Anyway, uh, anyone who makes up their mind before they hear the issue is a fool. Love it. And it's 100% true. And we're at a point where it doesn't matter what the issue is. You know, we all have sort of pre-prescribed reactions to it. We've been told how we feel about it, basically. Um, I don't know if I mentioned this in here, but I think Ricky Gervais. I think I did mention it. Ricky Gervais does a whole bit about how now you don't look at what's being said. You look at who's saying it. So if it's a guy from our side, no matter what it is, yeah, I agree. I like it, whatever it is. And if it makes sense and it's perfectly logical and would help us, but someone from the other side said it, fuck them, right? So, and social media has really helped advance that sort of shitty practice. Um, he's critical of what he loves. I feel like he was one of the first, because Pryor did it a little bit, but he was one of the first sort of African American comedians to be like, we're not, um, we're not without guilt in this whole racial divide that we have. Like, you know, we continue to perpetuate stereotypes. We we need to look at ourselves in this equation. Like, what can we do to better sort of facilitate racial unity and equality and things like that? Right. The whole bit, which is a really good bit about um, the difference between being rich and wealthy. Right. Shaq is rich. The guy who signs Shaq's checks is wealthy. Um, he's really critical of his own culture. Um, and that's back to what I was talking about I think with Bill Hicks, where it's like you have to be critical of the things that you care about, right? I think I used my kids pizza sitcoms thing for me, right? What do you care about? Like, you should demand the best from it, and you should want it to be as good as it can be, whatever it is. You know, if it's just something as stupid as, you know, pizza, or something as, you know, as important as your, you know, your political persuasions, or your race, or whatever it is. I don't know. Like, have to be critical of it. You know, um, change won't happen if you're not. Basically, um, oh, that's a good one too. Uh, white. Wait, what? Oh, my notes are not clear. White is still a bigger threat. Ali. Oh, he told the Ali story. What was it? I can't remember, but it was good. It was about someone, white guy shoots gun, white guy shoots gun, something, and then rapper says gun, congressional hearings, something like that. Because there's a lot of stuff in there too, like as he's being critical of his own people, his own community, he's also saying, you know, I'm by no means saying that it's our fault, but we certainly haven't, you know, in many cases haven't helped the situation. Because he talks about that, like how any brown people looking to, you know, to live the American dream and free market capitalism and all this kind of stuff, they get shit on, right? But the Rockefellers, and they all made their money on the backs of other people and doing corrupt shit. But in the whole government, right, taxed, and that this is a tie into Hicks too, right? Alcohol, cigarettes, tax, drugs, those are good. Those are great for you. Have as many as you want. But, you know, well, marijuana's a little different now, but all these other drugs that come from primarily brown countries, no, you can't do that. Yeah, you can't do that. You can't make money off that. You can't do anything like that. The Ali thing. Damn it. Somebody changed his name. He couldn't change his name. Ah. Anyway, um, a little bit on Tambourine. If you didn't watch that because the link didn't work, just go to Netflix and obviously search Chris Rock, and Tambourine will come up. It's actually directed by Bo Burnham. Um, the first, he does a great bit about bullies and Trump that I think is pretty interesting. He talks about how, you know, he was at his daughter's high school orientation or something, and they had these speakers come out, and one of them was like, "We have a zero tolerance policy on bullying. You bully, if you get caught bullying, you're expelled." Blah blah blah. And he goes off and is like, "What? Bullies are part of the ecosystem. Like, um, you need bullies, right? You need sometimes, yeah, you need bullies. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting for rate as our kids growing up. Um, And it's this whole bit, but the punchline basically is, you know why I know we need bullies? Because of Trump. He's like, we've spent the last 10 or 15 years trying to eradicate bullies. Now an actual bully showed up and we don't know how to handle it. We as a country don't know how to handle it. We have no idea how to deal with him. And I know it's kind of a tongue in cheek bit, but it's the way comedy can kind of erode your preconceived notions or erode your what you've been told to think. Um, yeah, bullying is bad, but let's look at let's look at it from this angle, and maybe there's something here, right? Um, he does a lot at the beginning of Tambourine, that special about cops shooting black kids, because I think it was 2018, so there was of a lot of that, the George Floyd, like I think a lot of that stuff was really um, was happening at that time, and he just has a great joke. One of the sort of things that people say, right, when a cop shoots an unarmed black kid or whatever, you'll hear in the media, oh, one bad apple, right? Well, it's just one bad apple. Doesn't mean all cops are bad. It's just true. But at the same time, then his joke is, and you should go watch it because he does it better, obviously. But his joke is, some jobs can't have bad apples. Like, why do we have bad apples in law enforcement? Period. Like, and the analogy he uses is like pilots. You can't just be like, oh, that plane crashed into that mountain. Well, every job has some bad apples. Like, you can't, like law enforcement especially. That's where we need to not have bad apples. You just can't have it, right? Um, and I think there's a lot in that first half of Tambourine where he's kind of, like I said, he's more seasoned. I think he's obviously older. He might be a little bit more introspective. He does a whole bit about his kids and is like preparing them for this white world. Um, when we think about anything white, we need to contemplate that shit. That's what he's saying. And I'll let you go watch the bit, but just teaching them to be. He's basically, if you're black and you have a son, you need to punch him in the face every morning before he leaves the house. So I just think Chris Rock he's sort of positioned himself. He's not a race comic, as it were. But if you wanted to label him that way, he's probably the best at it because of his perspectives. Because he doesn't, completely, it's not like a whole kill whitey thing, right? It's hey, we're all a part of this problem. And, it would, fixing our shit would go a long way towards fixing the whole thing altogether. And vice versa. I think we, white America, whatever, got to work on our shit too. We don't like to do that, but there's a lot of Chris Rock that really works, like especially in the context of this chorus, right? He's funny, He's talking about really impactful shit, and he's sort of fusing those two things at a really high level. So I hope you guys got a lot out of the Chris Rock stuff.